We are recording. Welcome everyone. I can't believe that January is almost over, but here we are. It's good to see you all. So this is the fourth presentation on the Courage series. So if you've been following along, which I think most of you have, good to see you again. For those of you that haven't, I always start with a quick recap. So we will do that. I'm grateful to our Governor-elect Beth, who's going to help facilitate some of the discussion, the part that I can't see. We have a few just questions I'll ask throughout for some feedback. And she's going to help with that. So I'm going to start sharing. Am I? Where did I go? And I need you to see my screen okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you can hear me okay. All right. So welcome. Like I said, this is the fourth session on our series. It says Courage, Commitment, and Character. And I'm going to do a quick recap for anyone who doesn't remember or just wants to be reminded or is new to this topic. So just a reminder, when we talk about courage, what is courage? The definition of courage. So we're defining it as the choice and willingness to confront fear, pain, danger, in furthering of a worthy goal. So when you focus on the goal, then suddenly you are a little bit more empowered to overcome some of the fears that you may have in getting toward that goal. And we agree as SPR optimists that we have a very worthy goal. But when we talk about fear, we're talking about fear of failure, fear of making a mistake, fear of upsetting someone, or something that we have all experienced and are continuing to experience, which is fear of losing club members because we aren't adequately addressing issues, disagreements, concerns within our clubs. So that's the primary reason we're focusing on this. Fear can paralyze us and keep us from moving forward. And as you all know by now, my theme is keep moving forward. And the point of this is to equip us to do that. So hopefully this looks familiar by now. This is the river of fear, the river that cuts through organizations, and this graphic is intended to help us visualize and understand. So on the left side of the river, where we have honesty, honor, ethics, and morals, these are the places that most leaders live in and act in. And it's pretty easy to be a leader and a decent leader when you're on this side of things. On the other side of the river, we have crises, problems, anger, disrespect, regret, jealousy, kinds of bad behaviors. So if we stay over on this left side over here and don't cross to the other side, then we don't have to deal with those tough things, those bad behaviors. But what's also on the other side are good things: effectiveness, outcomes, engagement, happiness, contentment, joy. And if we want to experience those things, especially in our clubs, we have to take the hard step to cross the river and deal with our fear. So then that was our first workshop. And our second workshop, which this is the one we did at the district meetings in the fall. So we talked about courageous communication, and this was the model that we used, CLEAR, C-L-E-A-R, to talk about how we can engage in respectful and courageous conversations. We had volunteers, if you remember. We have a couple, or maybe just Marnie, on the call, that did a role-playing exercise where we did a demonstration of a difficult conversation between a club leader and a member that was having trouble following through on assignments. And in this exercise and role playing, we learned that by focusing on relationships instead of outcomes, that we get better results. Our outcomes are actually better when we don't focus on the outcome, but we focus on the relationships that help us get to the outcome. And then in our most recent class, which was about, it was called The Courageous Self, It was learning to identify within ourselves what are the things that we fear, what are our own individual fears, and what are the things that hold us back. So we talked about these three things: how we act when we're afraid. We can disrespect others, we can give in to our anger and start yelling or throwing things, or we can hide out. And we learned that the first two, disrespecting others and giving into anger, clearly have very negative consequences. Those are behaviors we intentionally want to engage in. The third one, hiding out, which I think collectively we agreed is our greatest tendency to do, which is either to ignore the problem or just turn and focus somewhere else. So it appears to be a little bit more passive, a little bit more benign compared to the other two, but we learn that hiding out can also have equally destructive outcomes. So every time you revert to one of these three, you're being dishonest with yourself and with others. There's something that's keeping you from having a conversation or a relationship that matters. And as a leader, this destroys your trust and your ability to lead others. Okay. I concluded the third course, if you were there, with a quick teaser that said, instead of focusing on the three no's, we're going to focus on the three go's, things that we want to do instead. So instead of those three behaviors that I just mentioned, tonight we're going to talk about the three behaviors of courageous leaders that will replace those. Okay, so they're not really the opposite. They may look like the opposite when I say what they are, but they're really much bigger than that. So when we focus on the attributes of courageous leadership, our impact is going to be far greater than the smallness of those negative behaviors that we talked about. So let's dive in. So this is, you probably all recognize this, a person's a person no matter how small. So the first attribute of courageous leadership that I want to talk about is unconditionally and positively honoring and respecting everyone. So respect is the first behavior of leadership. It's necessary for all good relationships, right? Can we agree on that? So to honor means to respect and esteem highly. Why in the world would we not do that? I think the answer is because we sometimes equate respecting someone with recognizing someone and giving them maybe a platform, but they're not the same. Respecting someone doesn't mean that everyone we know receives equal praise, equal responsibilities or assignments or awards, or even public recognition. It just means that the lowest performer in a group or someone that has more challenges still gets attention, still is receiving communication and attention from a leader, but maybe isn't getting the awards associated with, more positive outcomes. So courageous leaders are responsible for building teams that last over time. And we can't do that by playing favorites. Does anyone play favorites? Like, be honest. I think I tend to. I'm very much conscious about not doing that. But even with my team at work, I mean, I have some staff members that I like more than others. And I maybe have a more social connection with some more than others because we're interested in the same things. But that doesn't mean as a team that I'm leading, I should respect anyone more than the other. So this is our first conversation question. Some people might think that respect has to be earned. So how do you feel about that? You can raise your hand. You can shout out.
Carla. Oh, you're on mute. Oh, now you're unmuted.
I'm unmuted. It just takes me a minute. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm still having audio problems myself, Judi. I relate.
I understand. It's frustrating.
It's very frustrating. So, I mean, for me, I think the basic part of respect is that at the end of the day, like, this is how I think about it with my staff at work. it doesn't matter if it's my AP clerk or my boss. We're all human beings, and there's a basic respect that we need to show each other. So I don't know that I think that it is only earned, right? Because I see that as like the base, that we're humans and we need to treat each other like human beings and remember that when we're dealing with each other.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I like what Carla
Yesterday,
said.
Carla kind of summed it up for us. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and I think, I have this conversation with myself a lot, and I'm going to use an example. I tend to be very respectful and very assuming the best in everyone until they do something that makes me mad, or does something that just is a behavior I really don't like. And so I have an example of someone that I work with, isn't part of my team, isn't someone that I work with, but this was a new employee. She came in and within her department just sort of tried to change everything
Mm.
and do things differently. And that in of itself is fine. I'm all about change and trying something new. Um, she had an issue with something that I did. And instead of talking to me and asking why I did what I did, she went to like our CEO and complained and had her own reasons for thinking she was right and I was wrong. And I had my reasons for thinking I was right and she was wrong. But she never had a conversation with me. And ultimately, I didn't necessarily disagree with how she felt about it. I absolutely would have taken her feedback and said, let's do it differently next time. Um, but the fact that she didn't even talk to me and she went like three people above me who I heard about it from, then my boss instead of hearing it from her. Um, and to me, that was kind of, I'll use this as an example because this is something I'm dealing with, in light of all this conversation we're having, is my initial reaction is fine. I'm just not going to talk to you anymore. I don't like you now. You made me mad. I don't like you. You don't do that. You don't go around people. Um, and I'm really trying to kind of replace that with, um, there's still a level of respect, right? It doesn't matter if I like her or not. It doesn't matter if I even respect the avenue she took. I can respect her as a person and I can still have a conversation with her and say, next time, just come talk to me, right? Um, I will say, it's hard in this day and age to have respect for people that we so fundamentally disagree with things on. And to Carla's point, it doesn't matter. People are people. It doesn't mean we agree. It doesn't mean by respecting someone, we're somehow saying, I agree with everything you stand for. It just means I recognize you're a human being just like I am. And that's much easier said than done, right? I get that. And that's the difference between a courageous leader and a leader, a good leader maybe, but not a great leader. And it's one of those things that doesn't necessarily come naturally. I think to some people it does. And to others, like me, I really have to work at it and I have to constantly remind myself um, everyone is deserving of attention and consideration and respect. And it doesn't mean you agree with them. And we're going to go into that a little bit more. So if you're leading a team as a leader, you're expecting everyone to bring their best. You're expecting everyone to act as part of the team. And you're expecting their behaviors to align with your core values. So I didn't touch on this in our recap, but we talked on our initial meeting about high core values, which are courage, um, character, and integrity. Um, so if we're all aiming and our behaviors are in line with those core values, then what happens when a leader is playing favorites and not giving each team member the same respect, regardless of what they bring to the table. It's not good, right? I mean, if you want a team, you have to assume everyone in your team is bringing something, and kind of checking yourself to say, am I playing favorites? If so, I need to watch that. Or, we talked last time about having an accountability partner, someone that can be really honest with you and saying, hey, I kind of see you starting to maybe play favorites with this person. Don't do that. Okay, so let's move on from this. So what do honor and respect look like? So these are some things. So when we're talking about respect, we're talking about being really present with someone. I mean, a sign of disrespect is, someone's talking to you and you're on your phone or you're looking down at the ground or somewhere else. So being really present with someone makes a big difference. Your body language says a lot, right? Making eye contact, smiling. If someone smiles, it's an indication that you're safe to talk to. So it's a very open, welcoming expression. And then finally, careful and thoughtful listening. Understand what's being said. Seek to understand. Ask questions if needed. Understanding is more than just the words people say, right? So research tells us that 80% of the feelings in a conversation are what we remember in 20% of the words. So to differentiate again between respect and kind of recognition, a courageous leader differentiates between people through rewards, recognitions, and assignments. I can respect all of you, but I can give my high performer more recognition and more assignments. And that's not a sign of disrespect. And in some sense, if we want to talk about earning respect, it's really not earning respect. It's earning those additional things that come with high performance. So respect is just the baseline. And as a reminder, I'll say this 100 times because I say it to myself as well. It's a skill. It takes practice. Don't beat yourself up if you find yourself, I do this to myself. If I say, oh, I could have been nicer to that person, or I could have been more respectful. It's a learning process, and it's practice, practice, practice. So now we're going to talk about soft leadership skills. So soft skills, I'm going to tell you, are exactly the opposite. They're hard. These things are hard. So here's another question for you. If I say that someone is touchy-feely, what does that convey to you? It's a negative,
Well,
positive?
I think you could call me that. But I'm probably perceived as a person that doesn't like conflict because I like everybody to be warm and fuzzy. And I think I would be a person that probably wouldn't take criticism very well. And I don't. So you guys know. I think I would be viewed as maybe not a strong leader, possibly.
Because you're touchy-feely?
Yeah, because I think touchy-feely people are, touchy-feely. I mean, they want everybody to like them and they want everything to be nice.
Okay.
That's just my thought.
Anyone
Kelly
else?
had her hand up. Kelly?
No, actually, Debbie just said it, but I would disagree that I wouldn't necessarily connect touchy-feely with not being a good leader. I
Oh,
might connect it with somebody who's more compassionate, which I think can make for a great leader. So I think you're a great leader, Debbie. Keep going. But I think touchy-feely for me is more like the physical, the hugger, if you will. Like I take it literal.
yep.
Linda.
So I think it can be both positive and negative. I mean, I'm touchy-feely. I like when somebody gives a hug, that kind of thing. But if there's someone that just does it, they don't really know you that well, they kind of don't respect your personal space, then it can be a negative. So it can kind of go either way.
Great. All good points. So yeah, I feel like I agree with all of you. Like, I think in some sense, in for some people, in some instances, it kind of has a negative connotation. Oh, you're touchy-feely. Like all you care about is feelings. You don't actually care about substance or anything else. Well, I don't think that's true. You know, to your point. Um, yeah, I think we just have to be careful about, you know, what the connotation of that phrase means. And I agree that I think that good leaders are touchy-feely. You know, maybe not in the physical sense that Kelly's talking about, that there's nothing wrong with that. Um, but, you know, being compassionate and empathetic and sensitive are not bad skills at all. There's certainly traits of a good leader. I think we just have to be careful about the connotation of, you know, to the general public. Sometimes it can sound negative. Um, so if we label courageous communication as touchy-feely, I think it loses some of its impact, you know, right? I'd rather say, let's have a tough conversation rather than a touchy-feely conversation. Um, because it sort of, we don't want to minimize how hard this can be, right? And just by reverting to, you know, everybody's not the same. Some people are more physically interactive with others, and that's okay. And some people do want their personal space, and that's okay too. That doesn't mean one person is better than the other. It's just another way that we recognize that not everyone's the same. So I'm just going to kind of conclude this little section by saying, as a reminder, a good leader will respect everyone, will reward many people that do things, and will probably fire a few people. So even the person that, you know, talking about a work situation, obviously, but even if I fire someone, you can still treat someone with respect. It doesn't replace the, the need for respect. Okay, so let's move on. The second act of courageous leadership is encouraging and supporting others. So I would like you to notice the word encouragement and what do you see in there? Courage, like, right? It's right
Right
there.
in the middle.
So literally, encouragement is the giving of courage, right? So we're supporting, reinforcing, and rallying people to kind of have the right behaviors, to high core values, and to be courageous. That is what encouragement is. So it kind of puts a new look at that word that we use every day to me now. The first step to encouraging and supporting people is to know them. So here's another question for you. How do you really get to know people? It was a hard question, I know.
Well, for me, it's observation and also questions, just to find out more about them. And yeah, those are the two basics for me, I think.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
Yeah,
Linda
I think
had
it's very important to ask questions and,
Yeah.
you know, get to know them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes it's over time working with somebody, you get to know different facets, right? Like initially you can ask questions, but like with the staff or even in our clubs, there are some people like that, like I know how they work because I worked with them for 10 years or whatever, right? So there are those parts of, you know, building a relationship.
Yeah, you're right. Just walking with them and doing tasks with them. I think guys tend to do that even more than women, but that is definitely a way that, at least in our household, that's the way it works.
Yeah, I mean, all those things, right? We watch, we observe, we listen, we ask questions, we engage in conversation. You know, you're going to be able, as a leader, you're going to be in a position to encourage and lift others up. If you know, what are they struggling with? You know, a bad day for me is going to look a lot different than a bad day for someone else because different things are important or a level of importance for different people. So The more you know, and the more you can recognize a shift in behavior that seems uncharacteristic. How many times do we say in our clubs, "Oh, that's just the way they are"? We accept that because it's maybe someone that's constantly complaining, or you may have the opposite. You may have the person that's always happy and nothing gets to them. And we start labeling people by that. But when we really kind of get to know people and understand more about what's driving those behaviors, I can tell you, and that person that's constantly happy has something going on in their lives that they just manifest it differently outwardly to others, than the person that's complaining a lot. Because I can tell you that the person that's complaining all the time also still has good things in their lives. It's just what they choose to focus on. But in order to really encourage and lift each other up, we need to know, what do I need to encourage you to do? What is something you're really working on? What is the best as a leader? How can I encourage you best? Do more of the thing you're good at. But if I know you're really trying to work on something, that's where you're going to need more encouragement from me as a leader. So in order to do that, you have to really know you have to know people. So the second step is making our need for and pride in each person crystal clear. So if you recall, if you were at the district meetings when we did the role-playing exercise, this is one of my favorite parts of that. And I think Marnie had this role actually, when she was dealing with her difficult club member, who was Tana. And she said, at the end of the day, it's not that you're doing something wrong. It's that I need you. I need you. I need your expertise. I need you. And I'm talking to you because I need you to be part of this team or part of this solution. So this conversation isn't because I'm mad at you or you're in trouble. It's because I need you. And I come back to that a lot. And if I were in a position of, I'm just thinking how I would react to this, and I'm curious if others feel the same way. If someone asked me to do something and I was hesitant for whatever reason, time, maybe it was something I was really interested, I don't know. And they said, I really need you. That would go a long way, right? Toward me saying, okay. I mean, I never say no. Many of you know, but I think that statement really goes a long way in saying, I want you to be part of my team. Look, even if you don't really, it's a good way to bring people along. Is if there's somebody, maybe you don't know really what their skills and talents are because they don't step up, even if we've asked them. But if you say, I really need you to be in this with us or with me, I think it goes a long way. Okay. The third leadership act is challenging wrongs. So how do we challenge people when we see something wrong? When we see a behavior that's immoral, unethical, unkind, disrespectful? What's the process for that? So we're going to look at a 4-step process. So the first step is, if we're going to challenge a wrong, then we need to be in a position to determine right from wrong. So next question for you. What is our guide, or what is your guide to tell us what's right or wrong?
I think it goes back to the respect piece. It's wrong if something's done disrespectfully.
Okay. Anyone else? I mean, there are obvious things like breaking the law. I mean, the thing is, there really is no, in some cases, yes, there's a formula, there's what's legal and what's not legal. But when we're talking about things that aren't necessarily illegal, there really isn't a magic formula, but there are things that can help us learn to discern right from wrong if you're not sure, right? First thing, I mean, there's always your gut instinct, right? I mean, we've talked about gut instinct before. Generally is pretty good. If you have a bad feeling about something, don't ignore that. that's probably telling you something important. Also, look at facts, right? I went through a period of fact checking anything and everything in social media. That was my hobby for a few years. I gave up because it didn't do any good. But um, facts are facts, and you can't you can't deal with behaviors when you don't really have information. So absence of information or ignorance um, is not the pathway to making good decisions. So sometimes you may need to do some research and find out some facts. Um, the second recommendation is just try to predict the consequences of taking one path versus another. I think we do this all the time, maybe subconsciously, but I think we're always looking at, well, if I do this, this could happen, or if I do that, that could happen. That often will be some sort of internal compass to deciding right from wrong. And then I think finally is just kind of, the moral principle approach. And I say that as if we all have the same morals. We don't necessarily, but ultimately when we make choices, we should be making choices that bring the most good to the most people. And that can help. These are all guides. There's no clearly I'm right and you're wrong, or clearly you made a wrong choice. It's just kind of having that, again, a good courageous leader will be good at following that kind of instinct that says like this doesn't feel right. The second step is to always stand up for what is right regardless of the risk. Okay, I say this if it's easy, it's not easy at all. So for example, if you were out in public and you saw someone speaking or acting harmfully to another person, what would you do? I think most of it would say depend. Most of us would say it depends. It depends on the situation. If I step in and intervene with someone, that has a knife or something, then I'm putting myself at risk, right? And that's not an easy decision to make. I remember being out on downtown San Francisco one night and I saw someone beating someone up. It just happened so quickly. I was like, I got to do something. But I'm like, I can't break up this fight. I'll probably get shot or stabbed or something, right? And it was really hard. And so I was kind of at a distance telling the person to stop as if that was going to make any difference. And then a police car drove by. I'm like, well, can at least flag down the policeman, which I did, who said, not my problem. That's another story. But there are things we can decide, right? So I'm not saying put yourself at risk of being shot or stabbed, but I think we can agree intervening when we see something going wrong is a courageous decision. Whether it's a decision you would make or not, it certainly is courageous. If you saw a fight broke out on the street and you saw someone else that jumped in to intervene, you would think that person is courageous and you would be right. It's easier when we're talking less about physical harm than harm to relationships, and not that that's easy either. It's maybe more willing to take a risk in that regard than it is to maybe a physical risk. The third step is to follow your conscience.
Judi,
Yes.
Judi, before you go on, so like when you say act for what is right regardless of risk, what if you're like in a meeting with your manager and what they're doing isn't right? And is that what you mean by regardless of risk if you bring it to their attention?
Yeah, you might get fired. You might,
Right.
right? And
Even though you know you're right, but
yeah,
it's a risk.
it's a risk, and
Okay.
the riskier it is, the harder it is, and the more courageous it
Right.
is. Yeah, and there are degrees, right? And you're constantly, I think, in our lives, we're constantly assessing: is this the thing that I really speak out about? Is this
Right.
enough or important enough? Right? We're always making those kind of judgments on and it being worth the risk. So again, not saying it's easy, but thank you for that. Okay, the third step to follow your conscience in your own decisions and actions. So, the first two were sort of about what you see behaviors in other people, but you have to be honest with yourself as well. Like if you find yourself maybe on the brink of a conversation that might not go well, or if you find yourself um, maybe um, kind of going along with someone that's doing something that you wouldn't necessarily do on your own. Before we can start challenging others, you have to be honest and challenge yourself, to make a decision. I'm not going to do this thing, or I'm not going to engage in this conversation. I'm going to step away from the gossip or whatever it is. If if you want to tell other people, don't gossip, it's bad, have the conversation, then you ought to not be gossiping yourself, right? So as a leader, you need to model that behavior. And to me, it's safer to be really honest with yourself because you don't really have to tell anybody. Like if my boss says, I want you to be really honest with me and tell you what your greatest weakness is, to me, that's harder than just telling myself, well, I know what it is. Nobody can challenge you on it. So start with yourself, and then getting in position of challenging wrongs that other people are doing. I'm not saying be, the great dictator or the great arbiter of all that is right and wrong in the world. I'm just saying when you see someone doing something that's clearly wrong, as a courageous leader, we would want to challenge that behavior, and we want to do it respectfully. So the fourth step, follow through so that wrongs don't get repeated. So if you're working with someone, let's say you have a club member that's constantly creating chaos by being difficult, by attacking people, by just being overly negative, challenge that. As a leader, you would say, your behavior is inappropriate. It's not helping our mission. It takes a courageous step to have that conversation, but you have to follow through because everything that we're talking about when it relates to courage is learned and practiced and practiced and practiced. We can only get better. Okay, now we're going to jump into courageous problem solving. So when two people have a conflict and are having trouble working together, what steps should you as a courageous leader take? So I'm going to revert back to some stuff from some earlier workshops. So step one is aligning behaviors with core values. And this kind of starts like, I'm just going to create the scenario of we have in our clubs maybe 2 members or maybe more that seem to have a degree of conflict that is causing some issues in our club. So it starts by getting to a place of basic civility, right? We don't necessarily have to like each other in our clubs, but we should be able to agree that we should be civil to each other. That's kind of the most basic, step of a relationship. You want more than that ultimately, but if we can collectively agree, we should at least start with assuming that we should treat each other with civility, then that goes a long way. So if you have 2 people, let's say you're a leader and you're trying to kind of solve a relationship problem in your club, the most basic understanding, you say, can we agree that we will keep this conversation civil and we will treat each other with respect and kindness? You don't have to agree on anything at all, except agree that we will choose our words carefully and not attack each other. The next question you would ask is, how does the constant disagreement and bickering between the 2 of you further our mission of empowering women and girls? And probably they will say it doesn't. So you start with the building blocks where there's agreement. Again, I still don't like you. I say that generically, obviously. But I can agree we're in this club for the same reason. We have a mission. If you have a member that doesn't believe in your mission, let them go, right? Like that doesn't help at all, especially if they're causing problems. So I think generally your club members will agree we should be kind, whether we like each other or not, and we should be focused on our mission. The thing is, that gives you at least a place to move forward. So the next step is to name the issue. Why do disagreements go unresolved? Like, let's say, Debbie and I are in the same club and we just don't like each other and we bicker a lot and it's obvious to our clubs. Why does that go on year after year after year? Debbie? Sorry, I didn't mean to pick on you.
That's okay. Well, probably because we don't talk about it. We just let it fester and keep coming up with reasons why we're right. Like I don't like you because of
That's
this. And
exactly it. Thank you.
yes,
You think you're right and I think I'm right. And
yeah.
so as long as we each individually think we're right and aren't willing to have the conversation and maybe soften it up a little bit, and why don't we want to have that conversation? It all comes back to fear, right? And
Yeah.
and I'm talking about fear of, we have a fear, you want to be strong. Like, I don't want to give in. I don't want to concede to the other person because I don't think they're right. I don't know that this is true for us collectively, but in some settings, apologizing can be taken as a sign of weakness. I mean, I hope that we've evolved past that, but I'm not sure we have as a society, not us as seroptimists. Um, but all those things can keep us from having the conversation, right? So I'm going to ask you this. This is going to use an analogy. Um, who's familiar with a cardiac event monitor? Beth. What does it do? Has anybody had to use one?
I had to test them for somebody. So we have them in all our schools and we go around and we test.
Yeah.
And uh, they are meant for someone to operate so that you can check people's hearts and shock them if they need that. But you put things on and it checks that. And in the good ones, they have the don't please, stand back, but they walk you through the whole all the steps that you have to take. And
So it sounds a little bit more like a defibrillator.
Yeah,
that really
Fine,
is.
which is fine. Yeah. So I'm talking more about like a
A
Holter
cardiac
monitor or
event
Ruth
monitor
would know.
is more like a Holter monitor where
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
you
Yeah.
monitor somebody's heart rate over time and you look for specific events. Like, oftentimes they'll be looking for your rhythm to go out of a normal pattern on a certain frequency. There's certain patterns that depict anomalies of the heart.
Yeah,
And that I'm giving you too much information, but basically that's you're watching someone's heart over time because your heart gives off electrical impulses and those impulses go in certain patterns and you're looking for abnormalities to those patterns so you can better know what might be the origin that's causing those pattern abnormalities and know better how to treat it. Okay, let's cut it at that. So
perfect. Thank you, Ruth.
on.
It's almost like I planted you. Thank you. That was a perfect description. So device. So if you're having a monitor, right, it's something, it's recording activity over time. It's not a point in time. It's like 2 or 3 days. If you're wearing the monitor, like if you're, engaging in a particularly physical activity or something, you make note of it, so that change in your cardiac pattern is associated with specific thing you did. So then, at the end of wearing this thing, like your physician it's a diagnostic tool, right? Like Ruth said, you can view both the things that you recorded and said, I did this thing and this happened to my heart, and also looks for just abnormalities over time. So, and then it's a tool to help your physician find a course of treatment that will help you avoid having cardiac issues in the future. So in short, it's a diagnostic tool, right? So we're not talking about heart attacks or cardiac arrest, of course, but we are talking about damaged relationships. So my question is there something similar to that, like a event monitor or something that is a diagnostic tool? Is there a tool that we have that can help us diagnose damaged relationships, where a relationship between two people isn't going well? And the answer is, of course there is. Okay, it's not quite as simple as, something you pick up, but as leaders, we have at our disposal ways to diagnose relationships over the course of time, and where along in that time, pattern that something went wrong. And I'm here to tell you that it's as easy as looking at the three things we just talked about, which is respect. Let's start with there. So the first, a way, probably the most fundamental way that a relationship can be damaged is when there's a lack of respect. A lack of respect is pretty much a sure sign that you're not going to have a good relationship with someone. I mean, would you expect someone that you're constantly putting down or disregarding or ignoring to have a great relationship with you? Probably not. So relationships that don't have kind of this mutual respect are very likely to fade over time or eventually die out. The second cause of a damaged relationship is failure to encourage and support each other. So encouragement is about relationships and support is about resources. If you provide one and not the other, it's going to be a difficult relationship to sustain. So if I'm constantly saying, I'll pick on Ruth for a second, you're my secretary, here's all the stuff you need to do your job. Here's a computer, here's a laptop, here's everything you need. Go be secretary. And I'm not doing anything to encourage her or help solve problems or anything like that. She might be okay, but she might not be great. On the other hand, if I'm saying, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it, but I'm not giving you the tools to do the job, then it's also going to be difficult. And she's going to say, you're expecting too much of me. So it really needs to be both encouragement and support. And then the third cause of a damaged relationship, if you remember what we just talked about, was the failure to challenge wrongs. So if we let bad behavior continue unchecked, is that a relationship you want to stay in? Is it worth continuing to invest your time? And really, it's just as much, let's say, I'm just picking on who I can see on my screen, and it happens to be Debbie and Ruth, so I'm sorry. Linda's on the call. So if Linda's constantly doing something wrong and I'm her friend and I never say anything, I'm as guilty as she is at some level, right? Because I'm not challenging her. So I'm not really a good leader if I'm not saying, Linda, you might want to rethink that, or you might want to, that's not really cool, or whatever. So those three things, the things we just talked about, which is respect, support and encouragement, and challenging wrongs. If you look at those things in a relationship, you're very likely gonna find the source of where the relationship has gone wrong in the first place. One way to do that, like let's say hypothetically, I'll pick on Hanford for a second, because this hasn't happened. Let's say Jennifer called and said, Judi, we're having a huge crisis in our club. I need you to solve it. Well, I'm going to say I'm not going to solve it. You need to solve it, but I will help you. And a starting point is always getting two people to talk to each other. And it starts as simply, like I said before, let's just agree we'll speak kindly to each other. We'll be civil. That's at least a starting point in some cases. And then we build from there. But sometimes it's good to just say, this is totally not a true case scenario. That's why I'm going to use it. Let's say Marnie and Peggy aren't getting along at all. I could ask Marnie, do you feel like Peggy respects you? Do you feel like she encourages you? Do you feel like she challenges you if she sees something that you're doing that isn't right? And I would ask Marnie the same thing. Does Peggy encourage you? But would ask the same three questions. And you get a feel for, from each person's perspective, what component of that triangle, if you will, is really the biggest issue. Okay. Remember, we're trying to kind of diagnose and solve what's at the heart of a damaged relationship. And these are just tools you can use. But I think, was I supposed to change slides? You guys missed my broken heart. Now I lost my place. Okay, so the model then for solving problems similar to the cardiac event monitor when we're talking about a relationship. It's like 4 parts I'm going to go over. So 1, assess what's broken. That's what I've just been talking about. Have the conversation, ask each other, what are the parts of this relationship that you like and what are the parts that you don't like? What part of this disrespect and all that, where is it going wrong? The second part is accepting the failure. So you want each person to recognize their own choice in disregarding these leadership characteristics. You know, I can sit here with a straight face and say to the coworker that I feel wronged by, I can say, I have not been as respectful as I could have been. And I can be honest that I need to own that. Like, she did something that made me mad, so I basically just don't talk to her anymore. Now, you're going to say, Judi, that's not a good thing to do, and you would be right. So I'm learning too. But I have to be able to accept my own, each person in the conversation needs to be able to own their part of how they're managing the relationship, right? The third point is to try to repair the failure, right? This is where it starts getting hard. So again, it comes back to respect. If we can get each other to agree that we're going to respect each other, we can start to communicate respectfully. We can start to team up and work together. So you as a leader, say you have a problem in your club with 2 people, you can have these conversations, but then maybe you can find, and it comes back again to knowing people, maybe you can find an assignment that gives them a chance to work together that's completely safe. Like, you can set up a scenario where I know what the contention is between my 2 members. I know that, if I think of a good example offhand, one likes to make sure that the agenda is adhered to super strictly, and one feels like it's more important that there's a little bit more fun and spontaneity in it. I'm just making this up. Can you find a scenario or something that is a compromise that can get people to work together in a way that's safe? Because you don't ever want to set up a scenario where it's not safe. And you have to really think about it, you know. What's an opportunity for some 2 people to work together, or maybe it's more than 2 people, as a leader, where you think this can't possibly go wrong. It doesn't mean it won't go wrong, because it could always happen. But you don't want to intentionally set people up to work together in a scenario where you know they're not going to get along. If Marnie and Peggy have totally different concepts of a table setting for an event, then I'm probably not going to say you guys are in charge of setting the tables. I would find another way for them to work together. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, I'm rambling at this point. So I always come back to this as a reminder that fear is a reaction, and it's our instinctive reaction to the unknown. And when not challenged, our fear can make us a prisoner of our weakness and keeps us on the lookout for the next injustice to attempt to justify our fear. Whereas courage is a decision. So if we're struggling with a relationship or we're struggling with something in our club, it's not going to fix itself. Our initial reaction is, I'm afraid. I don't want to tackle this. I don't want to have a difficult conversation. I don't want to make someone mad. I don't want someone to not like me. I don't want someone to quit. but none of those are the right. Those are all just reacting to fear. Whereas courage is a constant choice to say, I'm going to put myself at risk. I'm going to be vulnerable, but I'm going to initiate and have the conversation. I'm going to make the tough call. I'm going to challenge things that are happening that I don't think are right. And I'm not going to let bad behaviors go unchecked. That's the bottom line. So finally, thank you all for being here. This is a journey. This is not, I don't expect anybody, including myself, to just go out and be this amazing, courageous leader tomorrow. Many of you are already courageous leaders, but there's always more work to be done. So we have 2 more topics coming up. One's going to be growing your courage, and then we're going to end with the final piece, which is commitment and character, and how do those relate to courage. And just a reminder, lots and lots and lots of practice. And I've heard from many of you already that you're trying this stuff, you're experimenting. I have seen in practice, I've been at your clubs and events where I've seen someone upset, and then they come back to me and say, you know what, it's all fine. I had the conversation. And it's not easy. And I applaud you for
She also
making
said
the
another
effort.
movie,
And
Asphalt City.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
Yes, also free.
I have no concept of time. Oh, gosh, we're good on time.
She said that this one was like messed up her head.
Okay. Any thoughts, comments, questions, observations?
One of the things that I find difficult in leadership is, especially difficult situations, is timing. How do you know when is the right time? Do you pause and reflect before you intervene? Because sometimes just pausing and reflecting can have a real value in itself. And if you intervene too soon, when people are really raw and in the throes of their emotions, you can make it worse. And so that's one of the things that I find really challenging about leadership is knowing timing and the appropriate timingness when in this situation with these 2 or 3 individuals. And how do you really know? That's the thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's totally fair. And what I'd say is the longer you wait, the more damage gets done during that time. And what you don't know is what other people are thinking and observing and perceiving, right? So I may think, okay, I have to address this. I'm my president of my club and something's happening and I need to deal with it. But I need some time to reflect and think about the approach because this is very much me. I'm very much like, let me take it all in, let me pencil it, whatever, let me come up with a plan, right? And that's not wrong. But at the same time, the longer you go, then you have other people thinking, why isn't she doing anything? Why isn't she addressing this? And it is kind of a catch-22, right? So I mean, I think the answer is somewhere in between, right? You don't want to just instantly jump onto something because you don't necessarily know all the details. Like you need time to talk and hear both sides. I'm very much a proponent of there's always another side to the story, always, and you have to hear that. But I think it becomes patterns over time, right? Like if I'm a courageous, consistent leader, people will begin to see I will address the issue, I will tackle it, and it may not be on your time frame, but you'll know over time whether I'm a person that's going to act courageously or I'm a person that's going to be very passive and just let it happen and let the next president deal with it, right? Which isn't good. I didn't really answer your question, but it's definitely a conundrum.
Yeah.
Yeah, another one is not wanting to create more waves with people. Like if it happens at a meeting and it's two people, maybe you can pull them aside later and talk to them individually later rather than making a big scene if not everybody even notices. That's another thing that can happen. You know, the two people are hyper aware of what's going on, but other people may or may not really have noticed it even.
That's true. Yeah. And there's always, somebody can have a bad day, right? We have to be gracious enough to say, you can have an off day. You may say something you regret. But it's these continual patterns over time I hear this all the time, and I'm sure you've heard it as well. We're excusing a member's behavior by saying that's just the way they are. She's always been that way. And we know it. And so we've come to accept it. But then you have a new member come in that says, what the heck, right? Like that's when it becomes not okay. And people do leave. It happens all the time in our region. People leave clubs or join other clubs because of that one person.
Yep.
And that's really what I'm hoping that we can, not continue to procrastinate on. It's a lot easier to deal with one person than deal with losing a whole club because the person just kind of went unchecked, right? Any other thoughts? I won't keep you any longer. I'm going to actually stop the recording.